I watched my house burn from the other side of the street, flames climbing into the night sky, firefighters shouting over the roar, and one thought looping in my head over and over again. This didn't make sense. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't random. And the woman standing behind the police tape, arms folded, nodding like she'd just proven a point. She had been threatening me for months. What she didn't know was that a week later she'd walk into my courtroom, look up at the bench, and realize I was the judge assigned to her case. Before we go any further, if you enjoy intense, real-life stories where entitlement goes too far and consequences hit hard, make sure you like this video and subscribe. Karen Stories daily share stories like this, and your support helps keep them coming. Trust me, you're going to want to stay with this one. Let me take you back, because this didn't start with a fire. It started with rules. HOA rules. The kind that are written vaguely enough to be used as weapons by the wrong people. I bought my house years ago. Quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy. Just a place to come home to after long days at work. I kept my yard clean, paid my dues on time, never caused problems. I'm not the kind of guy who looks for conflict. I believe in systems, process, and fairness. That belief came from my job, but at the time, my neighbors didn't know what I did for a living, and I liked it that way. Then she moved in. From day one, she acted like the neighborhood belonged to her. Clipboard, HOA badge, that tone people use when they're used to being obeyed. She introduced herself by telling me my trash cans were visible from the street. No hello, no welcome, just a warning. At first, I brushed it off. Some people live for control. You learn that quickly in life. But it didn't stop there. She complained about my porch light being too bright, my fence color being off-tone, my mailbox not matching community standards. Every week, a new notice. Every notice more aggressive than the last. I followed the rules, or at least I thought I did. One afternoon, she showed up unannounced and told me I was in violation for storing hazardous materials in my garage. I asked what she meant. She pointed at a sealed gas can for my lawn equipment. Perfectly legal, perfectly stored. She told me it was a fire hazard and needed to be removed immediately. I told her I'd look into it. Calmly, respectfully. That wasn't enough for her. Over the next few weeks, the notices turned into threats, fines, legal action. She started telling other neighbors that my house was unsafe, that it put the entire community at risk. I later learned she'd tried to push for a forced inspection. The HOA board didn't approve it, but that didn't stop her from acting like they had. The night of the fire, I wasn't home. I was working late, reviewing cases, doing what I'd done for years. My phone rang around midnight. It was a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, all I heard was sirens in the background and a shaky voice saying, "Your house is on fire." By the time I got there, flames were already tearing through the roof. Firefighters were doing everything they could, but sometimes it's already too late. I stood there in shock, watching everything I owned turn into smoke, and then I saw her, standing with a small group of neighbors, wrapped in a coat, watching the fire like it was a show. When our eyes met, she didn't look surprised. She didn't look concerned. She looked satisfied. That's when a firefighter approached me and asked a question that changed everything. "Do you have any accelerants stored in the house?" I told him no. Everything had been inspected before. Everything was compliant. An investigator joined us. Quiet, serious. He told me the fire was suspicious, multiple ignition points, signs of accelerant use. This wasn't an accident. As they worked, I heard her voice behind me, loud, confident. She was telling anyone who would listen that she'd warned everyone about my house, that this was bound to happen, that the HOA had tried to stop me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my car, watching smoke drift into the dark sky, and I thought about every interaction I'd had with her. Every threat, every warning. Every time she said, "Don't say I didn't tell you." And that's when I realized something else. She thought she'd won. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't just another homeowner she could bully, and she had no idea how close she was to destroying her own life, because the investigation was only just beginning. The investigation moved fast after that night, faster than I expected, and definitely faster than she seemed prepared for. Fire investigators don't mess around when they suspect arson. They comb through every inch, every pattern, every burn mark, and what they found only confirmed what my gut already knew. This fire didn't start by accident. It didn't spread naturally. Someone helped it along. The next morning, I met with the lead investigator at the site, or what was left of it. Blackened beams, collapsed roof. The smell of smoke still hanging in the air like it refused to leave. He showed me photos from inside the structure. Multiple ignition points. Traces of accelerant near the garage and back entry. This wasn't negligence. This was intent. He asked me the question they always ask. Anyone have a reason to want you harmed? Any disputes? Conflicts? I didn't hesitate. I told him about the HOA complaints, the threats, the woman who had made it her personal mission to label my home a danger. I told him how she'd escalated from notices to fines to public accusation. I told him how she was standing behind the tape the night of the fire, acting like she'd predicted it. His expression changed when I said that. Later that day, they pulled HOA records, emails, internal complaints, meeting notes. What they found was disturbing. She had been sending messages for months, insisting my house was a ticking time bomb. She pushed hard for forced inspections. When that failed, she suggested taking matters into our own hands in one message that she probably thought was just venting. It wasn't venting anymore. Witness statements started coming in. One neighbor said they saw her near my house earlier that evening, walking around the side yard. Another mentioned smelling gasoline hours before the fire, but didn't think much of it at the time. Someone else remembered her loudly complaining just days earlier that something needed to be done before someone got hurt. Every piece added weight. Then came the security footage. A neighbor across the street had a camera that partially covered my driveway. The quality wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. A figure matching her height and build approached my garage late that night. The timestamp matched the estimated ignition window. A few minutes later, the same figure hurried away. That was enough. The investigators brought her in for questioning. I wasn't present for that part, and honestly, I didn't want to be. I didn't need to hear the excuses firsthand, but I read the transcript later. At first, she denied everything. Claimed she was home all night. Then she said she was just checking on things. Then she blamed concern for the community. Each version contradicted the last. When they confronted her with the footage, she stopped talking and asked for a lawyer. By the end of the week, she was formally charged with arson, reckless endangerment, and destruction of property. The HOA immediately suspended her from any role. Neighbors who once nodded along with her complaints suddenly wanted nothing to do with her. Fear has a way of changing loyalties fast. Meanwhile, I was dealing with the aftermath. Insurance claims, temporary housing, sorting through what little could be salvaged. It's strange how quiet life becomes after something like that. No routine, no familiar walls, just time to think. That's when I got the notice. A case assignment memo landed on my desk. I almost didn't read the defendant's name at first. Just charges, location, court date. Then my eyes moved down the page. It was her. She had no idea yet, no reason to suspect anything. To her, this was just another legal process. Another room she'd walk into thinking she could talk her way through it. What she didn't know was that the courtroom she was scheduled to appear in was mine. I considered recusal, of course, ethics matter. But the rules were clear. As long as I disclosed the connection and the oversight committee approved, I could remain on the bench. And they did. Everything above board, everything transparent. I didn't feel excitement. I didn't feel revenge. I felt something much colder. A sense that for the first time she would have to listen. I wondered if she'd recognize me. If she'd remember the man whose house she'd warned, threatened, and ultimately destroyed. I wondered if she'd connect the dots before she walked through those courtroom doors. Either way, the truth was coming. And there would be no clipboard to hide behind this time. By the time the courtroom day arrived, Everything felt surreal. I walked into the chamber early, reviewing the files one last time, double-checking every witness statement, every piece of evidence, every photo from the fire scene. This wasn't just a case about property destruction anymore. It was about accountability, about making sure someone who believed rules didn't apply to them finally understood the consequences of their actions. When the bailiff called the case, she walked in with that same confident stride she had when delivering HOA notices, clipboard in hand. Same smirk, same sense of entitlement. I watched quietly as she took her seat at the defense table, unaware that I was the judge presiding over her case. She scanned the courtroom, glanced at the audience, and then looked directly at me. That's when the color drained from her face. Recognition, panic. For the first time, she realized she was no longer in control. The trial began with the prosecution presenting their case, photos of the burned house. Fire investigator reports showing multiple points of ignition and accelerant use. Surveillance footage capturing her near the property late at night. Witness statements confirming her previous threats and obsession with declaring the house a hazard to the neighborhood. The evidence was overwhelming. And the courtroom grew heavier with each slide, each testimony, each fact presented. When her defense tried to argue that the fire was accidental, that it could have been caused by faulty wiring or negligence, the prosecution dismantled it piece by piece. Experts testified about the pattern of the flames, the placement of the accelerants, and the timing of the fire. Every argument she made was contradicted by scientific evidence. It became painfully clear to everyone in that room that this was intentional. Then came her testimony. She attempted to maintain composure, but the cracks were obvious. She claimed she had no idea anything would happen, that she was concerned about community safety, that her actions were misinterpreted. I listened carefully, letting the record speak for itself. The statements she had made in emails, the complaints she'd filed, the messages to neighbors, all of it contradicted her words. The jury was attentive. Every detail mattered, every slide, every witness, every piece of evidence painted a clear picture. This was deliberate. It wasn't a neighbor dispute. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was premeditated destruction. After the closing arguments, the courtroom was silent. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning. When the verdict was read, I could see the weight of reality finally hitting her. Guilty on all counts: arson, reckless endangerment, destruction of property. The sentence included significant restitution for the destroyed house, mandatory community service, and probation. Even as the gavel came down, I didn't feel vindictive. I felt the quiet satisfaction of justice done. She had believed her confidence and position in the HOA gave her the power to act without consequences. She had been wrong. And for the first time, she understood that authority does not exist without accountability. As she was escorted from the courtroom, whispers rippled through the audience. Neighbors who once nodded at her complaints were watching her face the outcome. Some looked shocked, others relieved. Everyone understood the message: actions have consequences, and entitlement has limits. In the days that followed, I began rebuilding my life. Insurance handled most of the financial damage, but the emotional toll remained. I learned to appreciate the quiet moments more, the small victories of life returning to normal. And I realized something important. Stories like this are powerful, because they remind us that rules exist for a reason, and crossing them can cost you everything. I share this story on Karen Stories Daily to highlight exactly that. Not to brag, not to shame unnecessarily, but to show that entitlement, arrogance, and abuse of authority always have consequences. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. Stories like this take time, but they are worth every second. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with someone who believed they could act above the rules? Share your story in the comments. If this story shocked you, frustrated you, or gave you that sense of justice, please share it with someone who loves true stories where actions have real consequences. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more intense, real-life stories on Karen Stories Daily. Justice may not always be immediate, but it always arrives.